Hello, everyone, and thank you for watching the very first presentation of the Wild Things series brought to you by the Colonial Theatre and Ammonoosuc Conservation Trust. My name is Gal Patashnik, and I'm the Outreach and Member Services Director here at ACT. This was the very first time either ACT or the Colonial did this type of event, so although things ran very smoothly, we've already learned some things to improve on in our future collaborations. That said, if you have any feedback, please let us know. We're always happy to hear from you. If you haven't already, I urge you to stream the fantastic Fungi movie, which is the accompanying film to this presentation. You can find out more about how to stream it, as well as other films at the Colonial's website. Just look for the Colonial at Home drop-down menu in the top navigation bar. For those of you not familiar with ACT and what we do, let me quickly cover the bases. ACT works with communities and individual landowners in New Hampshire's North Country to protect working landscapes, wildlife habitat, equitable open spaces, and clean air and water. We also work to create or renew interest in the natural world by connecting our communities to the land and each other through programming just like this. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, please either visit our website at act-nh.org or reach out to me directly. Email is best for the time being. We'll post contact info at the end of the presentation, so no need to rush off for a pencil and paper. I want to start by thanking Stephen, Christine, and the rest of the Colonial staff and volunteers who helped get this event off the ground. I know I can speak for the entire ACT family when I say how truly happy we are to partner with you, especially now when it feels even more important to strengthen our ties and support each other. We are thrilled to be doing this together. I also want to thank both ACT and Colonial members for making this programming possible by keeping our organizations healthy and nimble. And finally, I'd like to thank our speaker, Dr. Isabel Munck. Dr. Munck joined us from the Durham area where she works for the U.S. Forest Service as the plant pathologist for New England and New York State. She was lightning fast in her response to present, and we could not be more thankful for her excitement and willingness to share her knowledge with us. Christine Kelly and I moderated the questions as they came in, and to keep things lively, you'll hear me chime in throughout the presentation to ask Dr. Munck questions in real time. There is also a dedicated question and answer segment after the presentation. With that, I will turn to Dr. Munck to get us started. Please enjoy, and thank you again for watching.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Gal, for the introduction, and everyone at the Colonial for organizing and dealing with all the technical difficulties. My name is Isabel Munck. I work for the Forest Service, as Gal mentioned. In way of expertise about fungi, I have a master's in forest pathology and mycology from SUNY ESF in Syracuse, and a PhD in plant pathology from University of Wisconsin in Madison. And today I'm excited to talk to you about fungi and anything not related to COVID-19. So thank you for this opportunity. Now moving on to the presentation, mushrooms is mostly what people think when they think about fungi. And this slide shows commercial mushroom production in Pennsylvania, which is the state in the US that produces the most mushrooms. Mushroom production was started in caves in France, and everyone who likes to eat mushrooms can now enjoy mushrooms from the supermarket. However, mushrooms are only a very small part of fungus. As you may have seen in the movie, most of the fungal organism is underneath the soil in the case of these trays. And they provide a huge array of ecological roles. For example, mushrooms are really important for wildlife habitat and food. In this picture, it's a picture of a coral fungus on a decaying log, and you can see a salamander that's hiding underneath the coral fungus. A lot of wildlife eat mushrooms to sustain themselves. Some they say, for example, that squirrels depend on mushrooms for like 70% of their diet. Fungi are incredibly important in nutrient cycling. This is covered in the movie. They can decay wood. Very few organisms can decay wood because only things like fungi have the enzymes that are strong enough to break the carbon-carbon bonds that make wood and plant material. So if we didn't have fungi decaying wood, we would just be mired, we'd be buried in piles and piles of logs. I apologize, there's a little bit of a delay with the slides. And it's not letting me advance. Here we go. Okay. Mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae are most fungi that you see in the fall fruiting in forests are mycorrhizal fungi. Almost all plants, except for things like mustards, have mycorrhizal fungal associations. And mycorrhizal fungi are incredibly important in allowing plants to live on Earth. The picture in the background is a picture of a little seedling, and it shows the connections between its roots and the mycorrhizal fungal assemblage that it has on its roots. And you can see that's all the white thing. So you can see how much further it extends the space which the seedling can absorb water and nutrients from the soil because of its association with mycorrhizae. The fungus gets sugars from the tree, and the tree gets water and nutrients and defense from microbes and pathogens from the mycorrhizal fungus. And because I work for the Forest Service and Forest Health Protection in state and private forestry, my job basically deals with dealing with kind of negative impacts of fungi, including death and mortality that they might cause to plants as pathogens. But this is a very important ecological role, controlling diversity. For example, seedlings of certain tree species do not do well when they grow underneath the parent of the tree, because the parent of the tree parent also carries the pathogens that might affect the seedlings of from its own seed. So that contributes to diversity, because basically, for example, a birch may not succeed underneath itself, and that allows room for a maple or a pine tree, and hence fungi can contribute to diversity and forest composition. And sometimes fungi contribute to tree death, and so that affects water quality, because trees can regulate the amount of water that's in the water table by absorbing water and so forth. So when trees die, that increases water flow. And for example, the White Mountain National Forest was established because that whole area had been logged over so much that it led to a lot of soil erosion and decrease in water quality. So if you have something that's killing a lot of trees, whether it's humans or fungi, that can lead to a decrease in water quality. And that's kind of what we do in forest health protection in our agency, the USDA Forest Service. The mission of the Forest Service is to prevent, or of forest health protection within the Forest Service, is to prevent outbreaks and infestations. Infestations are caused by insects, to detect, monitor, and respond to new outbreaks, manage established pest infestations, and rehabilitate and restore high priority ecosystems. In our part of the world, because of our proximity to large cities with big ports, like the Port of New York, the Port of Boston, and so forth, and then not only because of the big city with a large port, but the big city with a large port in the proximity of heavily expanses of heavily forested land, we have been susceptible to a lot of introduced forest diseases. The most devastating was chestnut blight in the early 1900s. And you can see a picture of that on the bottom right, which has devastated entirely chestnut populations in our country. And chestnut was a very important tree. In some parts, it would make up 25% of the tree composition. But that was not the only pest that we've had. Around the same time, white pine blister rust, which affects white pine, was also introduced. And then Dutch elm disease and things like butternut canker. And most recently, oak wilt, which was being recently introduced has spread to New York. So in our office, we spent a lot of time responding to management of these disease introductions that are caused all by fungi. Another thing we do in our office is risk tree assessments. Sometimes trees in public spaces fail. As the picture on the right is a white pine with a large branch that fell off or broke off after a storm, and you can see that the wood is discolored. The sound wood is light and colored, and the dark colored wood is decayed, and that decay is caused by fungi, and it's caused the breakage of the branch that fell on the picnic table. So we help state parks and our federal partners to manage their tree resources to minimize damage of trees that might be impacting their resources and their guests. A lot of mycorrhizal fungi and decay fungi are choice edibles. As you can see on the right, those are oyster mushrooms, which usually grow in decaying maples. There's lion's mane in the middle, and then chanterelles on the left. And a lot of people are interested in foraging mushrooms, which is great, but it's also I would caution that you take a lot of care when doing this, because there are mushrooms that are deadly and poisonous. And so in the following slide, I have a list of mycological clubs that meet in our area. The Boston Mycological Club in Massachusetts, I think, is the first mycological club that was established in the US. And these mycological clubs organize forays where people meet together and they foray mushrooms together. And then there's usually experts that help people identify the mushrooms they've collected. And that's a great resource, because if you're curious about mushrooms and you want to learn more about them in an environment where you will get help to identify mushrooms, this is a great way to learn more about fungi. So with that, I'll stop my presentation. I'd like to thank you for your attention and take any questions you might have.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with some of the previous questions that were asked before the presentation. Isabel, can you hear me okay?
I can. Hello, everyone.
Okay, fantastic. So you guys are going to have to listen to us talk back and forth. And if you have any questions, please do send them in. We are keeping track of that. So a question from Jim. Looks like he's wondering about when the best time is to collect spores and how it might be best to store them. Do you have any insight on that?
To collect spores?
Yeah.
Spores of mushrooms or fungal or mushrooms?
He wasn't super specific, so I'm going to assume that he's asking about mushrooms, but maybe if he's around, he might be able to give me a little more info.
It depends on the mushroom you're looking for. For example, morels are spring mushrooms, and they come out right about now. But most mushrooms are fall mushrooms, so the best time to collect would be starting in September, sometimes even in the summertime, and all the way to October, especially after a few days after rainfall. And then in terms of storing the mushrooms, if you want to eat them, the best way would be, you could either cook them and freeze them, or You could dry them. You could turn your oven to about 60 degrees Celsius, and I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but not boiling temperature, a little bit less than that, and dry them slowly, and then you can store them that way. Just take the moisture out so that they don't get rotted.
Okay, hopefully that covered it. Another question came from Sonia. She is asking about tilling the soil or double digging for gardening. She asks if the soil ecosystem is adversely affected by tilling. She writes, I assume the tilling disruption would also impact the mycelium network. What is the scientific perspective on this assertion?
Sure. I don't think for, mycorrhizal fungi and mushrooms in general are really good at getting around. So if you just have a small plot of land and you're gardening in your land, I don't think that would impact the soil in the mycorrhiza. It might change a little bit, but not substantially. Another thing is when you have large farm production, and for example, like things like strawberries, they need to kill almost everything in the soil to get strawberries that are clean of diseases. And so that might affect the soil more seriously, although fungi can very quickly recolonize that soil that's affected by pesticides.
Cool. So she has one more question that I can read off here. Does mycelium also grow as a vast network in urban, peri-urban, and or non-forested areas?
Yeah, it does. It grows everywhere. It's amazing. Even in tree nurseries where they spray a lot of chemicals sometimes to keep the seedlings, a lot of them will have little mushrooms growing around them in the fall. They can get around. They make millions of spores, and those are mostly air dispersed or vectored by insects, and they're pretty much everywhere.
All right. There's also a question here from Rebecca. How prevalent are fungal diseases in tree mortality compared to invasives like emerald ash borer and others?
Sure. So the first major pests in the U.S., such as blister rust and chestnut blight, were fungal. I mean, gypsy moth was also one of our first introductions, and that's a tree insect pest. But very quickly after the introduction of chestnut blight and white pine blister rust, which were very devastating, the legislation changed and they started implementing plant regulatory protocols. So, for example, they started regulating the importation of live plants, which is how those diseases were introduced. Chestnut blight was introduced to the New York Botanical Garden, and white pine blister rust was introduced in nursery seedlings. At the time, the U.S. didn't have a lot of nursery seedling production, and they were introduced from Europe. So soon after that happened, the plant regulations changed to try to avoid new introductions, and so live plants are more regulated now. I would say, I don't know, in terms of numbers, which is more common, insect pests or disease or fungal diseases. We can't say that. I would say that recently insect pests have received more attention from the media.
All right. I'm going to shift us back to mycelium for a second. Vivian is wondering, what impacts do trails for human-powered recreation have on mycelium?
Well, maybe there might be some impact right at the spot of the trail, but overall, I would say minimal.
Okay, that's good to know. On that line, sorry, go ahead.
No, just soil compaction is not good for tree roots, but it's very small and along a trail.
Okay, just a little bit of follow-up on that. What impacts do even selective logging operations have on mycelium or soil health, and how long does it take to regenerate?
Sure. I think logging operations in our part of the world are pretty regulated such that they're not huge. The size of them tends to be pretty small. So even both the trees and the soil can recover quickly because there's nearby trees and forests that can repopulate that logged area. And for some tree species, such as birch and conifers and so forth, it's really important to have a lot of sunlight and open space. Otherwise, they cannot regenerate on their own. So I don't think that for our part of the world that the logging operations are detrimental to the health of the mycelium or forest fungi. And in fact, a lot of times you'll see mushrooms growing on old logging roads in the forest, like lobster mushrooms. I've only ever found them in old logging roads, and they seem to like the soil disturbance.
Interesting. Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in specifically about the movie. I'm going to just knock those out. I might actually ask all three and see if you can get them all in. Okay, I'm just going to read it out. Can Dr. Munck talk about the Fantastic Fungi movie? Did it give factual information? Was the time-lapse videography accurate? Do mushrooms really grow that quickly? That's from Patricia. And we've got another person asking, in the movie, they talked about how trees are supportive of each other and that a mother tree can recognize her offspring. How do these processes occur? I know that was a lot, so I can repeat if you need me to.
Okay. So full disclosure, I watched this movie in February. My friend Sharmila invited me to watch this movie. I don't know if she's a participant in the call, but that was before COVID. So I'm pulling here from memory before this crisis. But I do think most of the movie was pretty accurate. I don't know if the time lapse happened as fast as they like to show, but fungi do grow remarkably quickly, and it's astonishing how quickly they can grow. And then the part about recognition of the mother tree so they did paint that, in my opinion, a little bit with rose-colored glasses or whatever. Trees do compete with each other, so they do help each other, and they do share connections with their roots and the mycorrhizae to help each other, but they're also competitors. So there is some competition, and that drives forest diversity. I don't know exactly how trees can recognize each other, whether it's your progeny or not, but it's some kind of biochemical detection. And it's pretty amazing. Like, for example, like a pine tree will produce cones, and those cones will become, if they're not 80% of the seeds in the cone are fertilized, they will be aborted because they're not fertile. And if they're pine trees can make both pollen and female cones. And if the female cones are pollinated by male cones from the same tree, the tree knows that, and they will abort that cone because it's self-pollinated. So it's pretty amazing how plants do that. And I don't know the exact chemistry by which they can recognize each other, but they do. I hope that really covered incredible. The question.
If it didn't, please send another question. I'm going to shift us a little bit. Veronica asks, I understand that chaga, I'm not going to try to give you the Latin name. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
I know the subliquus.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Is a parasitic fungus that will kill our birch trees. Should we actively try to remove as much as we can if we see it?
Actually, no. We just did a study about this in the White Mountain National Forest because they were having a lot of harvesting, or they thought they were having a lot of harvesting of chaga, and they wanted to know whether they needed to protect that resource. And it turns out that there's not a lot of harvesting of it. Most of it was very close to the road. But we also took trees' pores it's a way to assess for like the health of the tree is to extract a core and measure the rings and see how well the tree is growing. And basically there was no difference between the trees with chaga and the trees without chaga. So it's not really affecting the tree health in terms of growth. The chaga fungus is a decay fungus, and the part that you see is not really, most of that is not really the fungus, but kind of a tumor of the tree's response to the fungus. And it looks kind of blackened, and that's why it's called the cinder conch. And it's harvested because people think, or there's been shown that it has biochemical properties that help people cope, that are anti-cancer. So,
Cool.
but it's not bad for the tree, and you don't need to harvest it to protect a tree. Whether you want to make tea out of that chaga conch, that's a different point.
Up to you, up to the user, right? Maybe ask your doctor first. I'm going to follow back a little bit to the question about trees being able to recognize each other in some way. And there's a follow-up question here asking, is it better for trees to be planted with like or different to themselves? Does it make a difference if there's diversity? I think is what this person is asking. Is it better for the forest health?
Sure. It really depends. You know, some forests, like the forests of the interior west, are very non-diverse because the conditions are so dry that only a certain type of tree will grow. In our part of the world, we have very diverse forest, and I'm not really sure if there's anyone that's done experiments to see how tree performance works with different types of trees next to each other, but we do know that if a tree has, you know, a species has a certain pest, it's better that its neighbor is not the same tree species. Having said that, you know, like conifers such as pines and spruce and fir, they really like to grow with each other. So it kind of depends.
All right. So
it's hard to make generalizations about forestry.
So I'm going to run through a couple. Can you still hear me? Sorry.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm going to run through a couple. See if maybe we can bang through a few of them. Looking for your favorite recipes for mushrooms. And do you like to eat them cooked or raw? And let's see, do you have any specific poisonous mushrooms that we should definitely stay away from if we see them? And one more here, what edible mushroom would you say is the easiest to identify for a novice?
Oh, it's a lot of questions. Okay, I definitely like to eat them cooked. And if you're collecting wild things, I would recommend that you always cook them because that breaks down things that could be, you know, problematic to you. Also, if you're collecting wild mushrooms, start out with a little bit. Don't eat a whole bunch because that, you know, you want to see how you react to it. In terms of what things to avoid, things that I think are really dangerous are false morels. They come out this time of the year with real morels, and they're very similar. And they, you know, that's why I think that would be a little bit dangerous because they look similar to real morels, which are delicious. Also very poisonous are amanitas. Their common names are things like death angel and things like that. The problem with them is that you can eat them and then you might not have symptoms until 3 weeks, you know, into the future. And so you forgot what you ate that made you sick, and they pretty much liquefy your liver. So by the time you go to the doctor, it's too late. They can be very deadly. And then what was the other? I can't remember all the questions. There was
Wondering what your favorite recipe for your favorite mushroom is?
Oh, my favorite mushroom? I don't know. That's really hard. I like black trumpets. Those are really easy to identify. I don't think anything looks like a black trumpet. The thing that's difficult about them is that they're dark, so they're hard to see. But when they happen in a place, you can see them everywhere. And I just like to saute them in olive oil and make sure that they're not grouped in a pan in a way that they're all over each other. You want to give them space. And sometimes I put a little bit of garlic in the olive oil to flavor the olive oil, make sure it doesn't burn, and then put the mushrooms in. And they cook better usually at high heat.
All right, you heard it here, guys. That's the expert advice. Sorry about the background noise. Got a little bit of cooking going on near me. So I'm going to shift us slightly and talk about some of the medicinal uses and medicinal properties that were talked about in the movie.
Sure.
They talked about potential medicinal properties of some fungi. Do you know of any research currently looking at fungi as treatment for current viruses, and any common and contemporary medicinal uses for mushrooms?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff with mushrooms. I mean, chaga is an example of a mushroom that's being shown to have antimicrobial properties and anti-cancer properties. I don't think there's been any commercial trials where people have been given chaga, but they've tested products made by chaga and the tree in response to chaga on tumors in mice and things like that, and they've been reduced. I think turkey tails have some kind of antimicrobial and antiviral compounds, but I'm not 100% sure. Penicillium is a very famous example of antimicrobial properties. Penicillium is a yeast or a mold, and as we all know, it was really important in conferring antimicrobial and antibiotic medication for many diseases and so forth. Unfortunately, bacteria, a lot of our pathogens are caused by bacteria and viruses, and they can share genetic material very easily. And so they can overcome antimicrobial resistance very quickly. And I know I have actually a lot of friends that are looking for new antibiotics, just like penicillin, in fungi and bacteria that grow in the soil and different types of things. So I don't think we've even tapped a little bit into all the properties that fungi have. In the movie, they talk a lot about like magic mushrooms and, mental disease and things like that. I don't know that we have a lot of information about that yet, mostly because a lot of those trials were stopped in the 60s and 70s. So we don't have a ton of information about that.
All right, I hope that answered the question. I have two more here. One, wondering about the so-called fairy ring, wondering if that is a fungal phenomena?
Yeah, that happens because the mycelium of the fungus, if you can think about it, grows from a center point out, and then it runs. Usually mushrooms occur when the fungus wants to spread. So it maybe runs out of, maybe conditions were good for the fungus to spread, and then things get a little bit drier and so forth. So at the edge of the mycelium is where all the mushrooms grow. And mushrooms are pretty much like a flower and a fungus. So you have this mycelium that's underground that's grown in a circle, and then it's growing mushrooms at the edge of it, and that's what causes the fairy ring. It's a real thing. It happens.
Very cool. Maybe we'll have to look up to see what that looks like. Maybe send us a photo and I can share it on Facebook.
Sure.
To anybody that's wondering what that might be. The last question I've got is wondering about clubs in Rhode Island. I know you mentioned some clubs of people that go out and forage or look for mushrooms. And we've got Kelly who's wondering about Rhode Island clubs that you might be able to help with.
I don't know any in Rhode Island. I'll look it up. I really like the Boston Mycological Club. I thought was really good. They have throughout the, from May to October, they meet every weekend or every other weekend in different parts of Massachusetts, and some of them might be closer to Rhode Island. But I can look it up and see. They also, like the Boston Mycological Club has a series of lectures that they do throughout the fall, when things are normal. So they have winter and nicer weather activities, but I'm not sure about specifically Rhode Island. I'll have to look that up.
All right. I think we could probably share any information you might have. Okay, I got a couple more questions here. Do some birds like to eat mushrooms?
I don't know about birds specifically. I would imagine so. I know deer and squirrels and a lot of mammals do, and there's people that collect the poop of these animals and then plate it to see what grows out of it, to see what mushrooms grow out of it. They make like poop slurries, but I don't know specifically about birds.
That sounds amazing. Poop slurries. All right, one more question here. In the movie, they showed some really different looking mushrooms like bird's nest. I've seen pictures of some purple and blue mushrooms. Do we have any wild looking mushrooms in New England?
But we do. If you Google like coral fungi, like coral, like the sea thing, like CORAL, they're pretty crazy looking, and some of them are purple and yellow and very brightly colored. Also, another very colorful mushroom are waxy caps, like WAXY caps. They are very bright, and you can see them in the summer and the fall. Bird's nest fungi occur here or anywhere. They usually grow in mulch, but they're very little. So if you have mulch that's a little bit weathered in the fall and it rains after rain, you can go out and look for bird's nest fungi. Yeah, we have a lot of very cool looking fungi in our hardwood forest.
All right, well, it looks like we have answered all of the burning questions that our folks might have about this topic. If anyone has anything that they think of in the future and want to reach out, we've got emails there for you guys to contact us. We hope you really enjoyed this, and thank you again, Dr. Munck, for that awesome presentation and Q&A. As I said, Dr. Munck's email, as well as Christine's email and my email, are all up there for you guys to use. I know we'd all be happy to hear from you with any questions or feedback you might have. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and we look forward to doing another one, so please keep an eye out for future events. Have a wonderful evening and a good night. Take care.